So today we're mainly going to talk about the conjunctions with the second lord. Alapaladipika's 5th and 6th texts in chapter 16. But we're also going to look at text number 4, which finishes off the bit about the first lord. So that's the nature of chapter 16. He's going to give like conditions for the first lord, and conditions for the second lord, conditions for the third lord, and so forth through all the 12 lords. So kind of like yoga's per house lord, but not really as complex as yoga's. Anyway, let's figure out what he's saying for text 4, finish up the first lord, and then hop on over to text 5 and 6 and see what kind of interesting stuff he has to say about the second lord's conjunctions and etc. Okay, so for the first lord, he's going to discuss how you would determine fame, happiness, health, and surroundings based on the conditions of the first lord. I never recommend anyone to be an idiot. So I don't recommend that you forget everything else that you ever learned about other ways of understanding fame, happiness, health, and surrounding and think that this would replace them all. But this is an important addition to your tool belt of things for understanding those aspects of life. Okay? So he's Vikyata Kirano Jole Tanupato Suste Sukhi Vardhana Duste Dukhasya Driksha Nicha Bhavane Vaso Nikrishta Sthale Swasto Jivati Shaktimat Yudaya Bhe Vardhishnur Ujasvala Nishaktau. I'm just going to change this to a B. Go ahead and make the correction. Nishaktau Nihato Vipad Birasakrit Kinno Bhaved Atura. So inside that Sanskrit is a lot of interesting things. And this is what it means. The first thing he said is that visibility or fame corresponds to the visibility of the first lord. So here's how he put it. He said, Vikyata, which means how bright you are, how much you shine, how attractive or how interesting you are, how eye-catching you are. Vikyata, how famous you are. That corresponds to Kirano Ujvala, how bright. So basically what he's saying is how bright the native is corresponds to how bright the first lord is. Tanupati, the first lord. How would you figure out how bright the first lord is? Does anybody remember how you figure out how bright a planet is? Let's see, anybody know? There's a very easy way to know how bright a planet is, relative to however bright it usually gets. Super easy way. Nobody wants to say? You got it. Saundarya Raman. It is the distance from the sun. That's the simplest way. So in other words, the further a planet is from the sun, the brighter it is. So in other words, the further the first lord is from the sun, the more famous the person should be. Why? Because the brighter the first lord is. Make sense? It's just away from the sun. Very good, Saundarya. That's a nice... See, astrology is actually this simple. It's actually that simple. How famous are you? How famous is your first lord? Bus, you're done. Like I said, I don't recommend people be dumb and forget that there's... the thing that makes astrology complicated is not that any one of its parts are difficult at all. It's just that there's so many parts operating at the same time. Every little individual part of astrology is actually very simple and obvious. The thing that makes it difficult to do well is that you have to do 150 of those things at the same time, just to decide one thing. Okay, so he said the brightness of the person corresponds to the brightness of the First Lord. The visibility or fame corresponds to how visible the First Lord is. Then he also says happiness is nourished if the First Lord is not in a dustan, otherwise unhappiness is nourished. So that's where he says suste sukhi vardhana dushte dukasya. If Tanupati, the Lord of the First, is in a good spot, then he's happy. She's happy. It's the simplest kind of interpretation you can come up with it. And if it's in a bad spot, then he's not happy. So basically, it just means if it's in 6, 8, or 12, then the person doesn't really easily get happiness. They easily get difficulties. Whereas if the First Lord is in another place, they more easily get happiness. Simple principle. Again, don't be silly. To pick a nicer word, I've been gradually becoming nicer. The first time I said don't be an idiot. The second time I said don't be stupid. Now this time I said don't be silly. Don't be silly and forget all the other principles, the other 149 things you have to consider, but this is one. So also, don't be silly and just think only by the letter of the book. Understand what the teacher is telling, and then you'll understand what the teacher means, and then you'll be able to expand on it. So for example, if Mantreshwar tells us the brightness of the First Lord indicates the brightness or visibility or fame of the native, that's simple, right? And you can understand the brightness of other planets is good for their indications. The brightness of the Second Lord is good for the second house, right? So you can understand the teacher's mind. It is better than just understanding the words. The way to understand the mind is by understanding the words. Now, so especially important on the same thing about how famous you are, how bright is the moon? And then the same thing with the Dustan and the Sustan, particularly. If your First Lord is in a Dustan, you're miserable. And if your First Lord isn't in a Dustan, you're super happy. That is very cut and dry and awfully overly simple, isn't it? Yes, it is. Because it's just one part of a 150-piece jigsaw puzzle. It's one part of a recipe. So you can just derive the deep meaning of this is the more planets you have in difficult houses, the more difficult your life is. And the more planets you have in easy houses, the easier your life is. And also, it doesn't necessarily have to be Dustan or not Dustan. He did actually say Sustan versus Dustan. So you might want to say an angle or a trine. And so the houses like 3 to 11 might be mediocre. That you have to consider carefully what you want to do with that. Okay? So let's go on and see what else is up here. The third thing he said was surroundings. So he's going to show us how to understand fame, happiness, and health and surroundings based on the situation of the First Lord. So by surroundings, he means things like, where do you live? And what kind of people are there? So it also kind of implies family. Or your friends, your associates, the people that you live with. Where do you live and who do you live with? This is what he's talking about now. And what he says is Driksha Nicha Bhavani Vaso Nikrishta Stale Swasto Jivati Shaktimati. Let me see. What does he mean there? Yeah, Jivati Shakti Mati. So what he's saying is, if that first Lord is debilitated, then what does that mean? Just symbolically speaking, what does it mean? It means you took your little planet that represents you and you put him in a place that he doesn't like, that makes him depressed, that's debilitating. So what's the interpretation? It's easier than reading words. Reading symbols is easier than reading words. It's so simple. This person is in an environment that puts them down. The environment doesn't help raise them up. The environment puts them down. So if the first Lord is debilitated, it indicates that they live in undesirable places. Nikrishta stale. They live with people that are undesirable. They live with people that don't really help them. And it also says Driksha. So also if it's getting aspected by certain planets, you have to also see the aspects on the first Lord. If it's being aspected by friends, then it's being helped by, then the person, the first Lord is, if the first Lord is being aspected by friends, then the person gets help from friends. Their friends are looking at them. Their friends are concerned with them. Their friends take care of them. If the first Lord is getting aspected by enemies, then the person has enemies always looking at them. It's that simple. So surroundings are as undesirable as the undesirable influences on the first Lord, which includes aspects and dignity. I love how simple this is. Then finally he said vitality. So that's health, right? Life force, the power and the strength, vitality is ensured if the first Lord is domicile and if the first sign is nourished. To the extent it is not, then illness, depression, and problems. So here's where he says, Udaya be Vardhishnur Ujasbala. If the first Lord is being nourished, if the first house is being nourished. So he's also saying it's check the first Lord and also check the conditions to the first house when possible. So if the first Lord is bright, but there's nothing helping the first house, it's not as good as if the first Lord is bright and there's great stuff helping the first house. If the first Lord is bright and debilitated, then it's not as good. It's not as bad as if it's dark and debilitated, and it's not as good as if it's bright and exalted. You put all the things together, all these simple things you use together, and that's where it starts to get a little difficult to do astrology well. It's just like being a waiter or a waitress. It's not hard to carry a plate, but it's hard to carry 15 of them at the same time. So that's really what you're being asked to do, to be able to do astrology competently. You're being asked to do a lot of many simple things, but a lot of very simple things. Balancing them all. So first Lord, that's bright and very dignified with a lot of good aspects, while the first house also has good aspects. That person is happy, healthy, wealthy, and lives in good company. You see? Does it make sense? Thank you, Dallas. Good brightness of the moon also refer to the moon phase. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It can refer to anything else. And the moon phase is determined by its distance from the sun. Now, let's move on and see what's in. So now to the main topic, right? The main topic of the live stream is supposed to be conjunctions with the second Lord. So he's going to cover that in the next two statements that he makes. Let's see what they are. And you can take this information and use it as a template for applying to any of the lords. Maybe he will do that himself in the chapters, or maybe not. Soundarya asks, is it to be a Gemini, Virgo, Taurus, or Libra ascendant? Mercury and Venus. Mercury and Venus don't move too far from the sun, but that doesn't matter. So in most cases, I'm surprised. Anyway, in most cases, the way that you determine brightness is how close to 180 degrees away from the sun is. In every case, the planet is brighter the further it is from the sun. But different planets have different maximum distances. Most planets have a maximum distance of 180 degrees. But the two interior planets, Venus and Mercury, they have maximum distances of much less than 180 degrees because they're interior. They're closer to the sun than the earth. So they can never be far from the sun from our point of view on earth. So all you do there is you say how close is the planet to its maximum distance. So Venus, for example, is 40-something, like 46 degrees maximum distance. So if it's close to that many degrees away from the sun, it's close to maximum. It's just that you have a smaller range for your ratio. Mercury is 30, I think 30 or something like that. So the closer it is to that. Soundarya says, what about Leo? Oh, that's an interesting thing. And a Leo ascendant. So how would you determine it for a Leo ascendant? You refer back really to where he defined Bala, the Shad Bala system, because he talked about brightness and how to do it there. And he said the exception for the sun. So her question is, look, if it's a Leo ascendant, then the first lord is the sun. So how can the sun get far away from the sun? So these are the kind of good questions that I like. People that are listening and trying to digest the material. So in that case, the sun is considered, there's two ways to consider the sun's brightness. The closer the sun is to the Uttara Ayana, the Uttarayana, the northern or the ascended solstice. So the closer it is to June 21st. That's one way of considering the sun to be brighter or less bright. The other way is how close is it to noon on that day. So those are the special considerations for the sun. The sun is considered bright or dim. It's dim at midnight and it's bright at midday. That's the most obvious. And then also over the course of a year, regardless of your, I would say regardless of northern and southern hemisphere, it's dim when it's in the south and it's bright in the north. But maybe it would be better to make it hemisphere specific. All right, shall we go and look at the second lord? What he has to say about the second lord? Francesca, yeah, these are very, very beautifully simple techniques. And really that is the character of his whole book. It's beautifully simple. Okay, so let's see what he has to say here. So let's look at these two texts together. Artha Swamini Mukhya Bhava Joshi Sat Swarte Kutumba Shriya Sarvat Krishna Guno Dhani Chasumuki Sya Duradarshi Nara Sambande Savitur Dutiya Patina Lokopaka Rakshaman Vidyam Martam Avapnuyat Atashane Kshudraupa Vidyarata. I'll give you guys a challenge. Try to follow along with the Sanskrit. So the hints will be, you're going to hear names of planets that you have some chance of, maybe you would know that name, that word. So it's going to be like the 6 lines out of these 8 lines, like 6 of them are about the conjunction of a particular planet with the second lord. So sambande, maybe know what that means? Sambandha means conjunction. It means joint, relationship, joint, union. Sambande savitur. Do you know that word? Savitur is the sun. So that's the line about if the second lord is conjoined with the sun. Sambande savitur dvitiya patina. Maybe you could even follow that. Dvitiya to pati, the lord of the second. Sambande Savitur, the conjunction of the sun with Tvitiya Patina, the Lord of the second. And then the effect, Lokopala Rakshaman. We'll talk about what that is. But just try to grow your Sanskrit brain muscles. Vidyam Artham Avapniyat Atta Shani. Kshudraupa Vidyartata. So that's if the second is conjoined with Saturn. Jaive, that's Jiva. Do you know that that's the name of a planet? Which planet is called Jiva? That's Jupiter. Jaive, Vaidika Dharma Shastra Nipuno, Bodhe, that's Buddha. Which one is Buddha? Mercury. Jaive Vaidika Dharma Shastra Nipuno Bodhertha Shastre Padu Shringarokti Patur Brigor. Who's Brigu? Venus. And what's the effect if the second lord is joined Venus? Shringar Ukti. Shringara Ukti. We'll talk about what that is. Shringarokti Patur Brigor Himaruchi. That is a very beautiful name for, anybody know? Himaruchi? Himaruchi is a very beautiful name for the moon. It's very beautiful because it means cold, beautiful rays. Beautiful, cool rays. So the moon is very different than the sun. The sun's rays are hot and sometimes overbearing and can actually damage your skin. But the moon will never do that. The moon's rays are cooling and gentle. So we call the moon Himaruchi. Himaruche Kinchit Kalavid Bhavet. He says it's kind of the same as a conjunction with Venus. Which makes sense because they're both female. Kauje. Who's Kauja? Kauje. Kuja. Kauja is Vriddhi of Kuja. Kuja is who? Mars. Kauje Krura Kala. Oh, you have also art. Well, you have martial art. Krura Kala. Patusha Pishno Rahu. Rahu will give you Pishna and Stite Lohala. Keto. Brasha Dali Kavak. Danagatai Papaishcha Mundho Danai. All right, time for translations. So he has a couple of generic statements. Like he has a couple of things about just the second house, and then he's going to go into this list of the second lord conjoined the different planets. So his basic thing is, if the second lord, let's listen to this. If the second lord is in the first house, while the second house has good planets, they have family, beauty, all desirable qualities, wealth, a nice face, and good vision. The more the second house has malefic influence, the more foolish and poor the person is. So this is his general instruction on how we should interpret the second house. He said specifically if the second lord is in the first house. Why does he say specifically in the first house? Because a lot of what he talks about is they have good wealth. They have a nice face. They have beauty. They have a nice face. They have good vision, good eyesight. So a lot of the effects are physical. And the first house is the physical house. And then also qualities, the obvious qualities. And that also means physical things. Like they have attractive qualities, features. So he's specifically saying if the second lord's in the first house, they get these nice things like beauty. But just abstract it a little bit. If the second lord is in any good house, like any angle or trine, kind of. I mean, learn about the specific lordships. Like second going to the 10th is a little, dries out the second house. It dries it out or it spreads it out. But the second lord going to any kind of good house will be good for the second house and the things that the second house represents, which is family, health, vision, diet, face, words. So his principle is one, and it's the same principle that we just learned for the first house. Take two simple considerations, the lord of the house and the house itself, and then see how much are they both prospering. Is the second lord in good conditions? Does it have good aspects? Is it in good dignity? Is it bright? Is it in a good house? Tally that up. And then how about the second house itself? Does it have good occupants? Does it have good aspects to it? You can also look at the second house from the moon. Does that one have good occupants? Tally all that up. And the more you get positive tallies, then the better you get the qualities of the second house, which all you have to do is make sure that your basic fundamentals of understanding what the houses are is clear. Second house is money, second house is health, second house is family, second house is upbringing, second house is face, second house is learning, knowledge, all the things that support you in life. And then vice versa. The more that you see those 2 points having difficult influences and difficult situations, the more those things of the second house go bad. It's very simple, right? Is it not simple? You have any questions about it? Boom. So Dawn has an interesting statement. Francesca says, I know you already have enough on your plate, but if you ever run out of material, you should do a series teaching Sanskrit. I did search YouTube for Viktikara Sanskrit. I did the pronunciation. I did a video on pronunciation, which will also include extended pronunciation, like poetic meters and stuff. But thank you. Also, there's good stuff already on YouTube. Then Dawn says, people can have wealth but not have a good family or nice face. They may have some qualities, accepting is not. Somehow we got disconnected and now reconnected. So I read Dawn's question, not sure when it got disconnected. I read Dawn's question, people can have wealth but not have a good family or nice face. They might have some qualities, etc., not others. That's why it's important to be able to carry more than one plate if you're a waiter or a waitress. If you can only carry one plate at a time, you will get fired. Like my friend Tim Cohen. So in other words, if you can only do one technique at a time, you're never going to be able to figure out things like, how can a person have a nice looking face but be poor? If poverty and face both belong to the second house. But if you can carry a few plates at the same time, it'll become obvious. Like Venus has to do with appearance, first lord has to do with appearance, 11th house has to do with wealth. So maybe everything that affects appearance is doing really good and everything that affects wealth is doing really bad. And the second house, which affects both, is whatever it has conditioned. You're still going to get different effects on the face versus the wealth. Chinmoy says, if the Ascendant Lord aspects the second house, but the Ascendant Lord is malefic, Chinmoy Ji, you must watch all of the live streams. Why skip a live stream? This information is so valuable. Mantreshwar already explained that the Ascendant Lord is never malefic. All right. So now let's look at this how the second lord joins with other planets will influence how the second house topics work. If the second lord is with ... then the person ... That's the format. So if the second lord is with the sun, then the person supports and protects others. Duh. That's what the sun does. Every single planet is held in its orbit by the sun. Every single thing on Earth is nourished by the energy of the sun. We all are dependent 24/7 on the sun. So what does the sun symbolize? It symbolizes the ability to be paternal and to be able to hold people up and to support people and to give people a stable foundation on which they can live and grow. That's what the sun represents. If it's with the second lord also represents family, because that's what the second house is all about. So if the second lord joins the sun, then it clicks on that topic of being able to support a family. Not just the family, but it's also the extension to society, being able to be helpful in society. So it could be getting into a career in social work or politics with a good motive. So that's what happens if the second lord is conjoined the sun. It makes very simple sense, right? No? Any question? What if the sun is the second lord? Is that why Cancer is so protective? So that's why you have... That's a good observation, Francesca. The rising signs have the character they have. 40% of what they have is based on what planets are the lords of what houses when that sign rises. It gets easier and easier and easier to do live streams about astrology because I have more and more, like, I guess you would say, knowledge. And you guys seem to be either new to the channel or forgetting the stuff that I said before. So I just have like an encyclopedia of stuff that's like new to everybody. But that's why I was thinking, maybe you should watch all that older material. Rewatch it. Go and rewatch it because all that stuff is there and it's just as good as if it was new. There's nothing really that makes a live stream better when it's live, except that you can ask questions. No, don't be sorry. I'm very happy. Now, what about if the second lord joins Saturn? He says, little and basic interest in education and prosperity. So also you can just extrapolate that he's basically seeing that Saturn is kind of antithetical to the second house. The second house, and this is a basic way that you want to do astrology in general. Look for where antithesis happens or synthesis happens. That's a new term for me. I usually call it synergy or dissonance. But look for where antithesis or synthesis happens. For example, second house and sun, there's a synthesis on fatheriness. But second house and Saturn is an antithesis. Antithesis. Because Saturn doesn't give a damn. Saturn just doesn't care about stuff. Saturn is done with everything. It's had enough of everything. Nobody treats Saturn the right way. So why should Saturn treat anybody the right way? So Saturn is like antithetical to unions and bonds and partnerships. Just leave me alone, is Saturn. So that's why the conjunction between Saturn and the second lord isn't so inherently prosperous. Don't lose your brains. Always remember that your job is to carry a lot of plates at one time. Here's one of the plates. One of the plates is what planet has conjoined the second lord. This was equally good if it's a strong aspect. But that's just one plate. The other things like even from just today, about brightness of a planet makes a big deal. About dignity of a planet makes a big deal, for example. So an undignified sun conjoining his second lord, you might not really want to jump up and offer the positive interpretation. Or a very dignified Saturn, you might not want to raise your hand and offer the negative interpretation. You might want to sit back and see what else there is in the chart that helps you make up your mind about this. Do you understand what I'm saying? Hopefully it makes sense and it doesn't just sound like amazing words. The words should make sense, what I'm saying. What if Jupiter conjoins the second lord? If Jupiter does so, then he said it was Jaiva. Where's that part? Oh my. I never did this. I never did the word for word on the second part. Jaive Vaidika Dharma Shastra Nipuno. What happens if Jupiter conjoins the second lord? You get Vaidik. So this means the person is interest. One of the meanings is the person becomes nipuna, or expert, or educated in Vaidhi, which means laws. So this is because there's a synergy or synthesis, syncretism between the second house and Jupiter. What is that? The synchronicity is that the second house has to do with education, knowledge, because fundamentally second house is about things that support you. And Jupiter has to do with knowledge, education. So if Jupiter conjoins the second lord, the person probably gets good education. What kind? Probably Jupiterian, which means what? Dharma. They care about laws. They care about morals. They learn about laws. They learn about morals. They learn about ethics. Vaidika Dharma. And Vaidika also means Vedic. And Shastra also means scripture. So it's not just, it can be any of this spectrum of things, anything from this spectrum, from legal to ethical to moral to philosophical to religious. That's Jupiter's spectrum. Those 5 things are all basically the same thing, just with a different amount of salt or a different kind of flavor. So with Jupiter conjoined the second lord, the person should have good education in those kind of topics. Does that make sense? I think it does. Divine chart says back to the sun, so this would be the positive side of conjunction, second of combustion, right? Because she's saying if the second lord is with the sun, then it might get combust. So apparently he didn't care. But also you might want to bear that in mind as another plate that you have to juggle. The conjunction with the sun sounded pretty good, but if this planet gets close to the sun, it starts to become invisible. So that would be negative on the second house. So ideally, to ideally get the ideal effect of the sun's conjunction with the second lord, you get it through aspect rather than conjunction, or you get it by loose conjunction outside of the orb at which the planet starts to disappear into the combustion. Good question. Divine charts. Roma asks, what if Saturn is ruling the second house? Then you can't have the second lord conjoin Saturn, can you? Then Saturn can rule the second house for Sagittarius, and it can rule the second house. But that's why Sagittarius tends to get into conflicts with their family, or to have a family that's sort of distant or argumentative or something, because it doesn't take the turn on knowledge, because Sagittarius itself is so pro-knowledge. And the other case where Saturn rules the second house is for a Capricorn ascendant. And so that's moot, because now Saturn is glorious, because the ascendant lord's always glorious. But to directly answer your question, you can't have the second lord conjoined with Saturn if the second lord is Saturn. Dawn says, so some houses are heavily aspected, some not so much. I would guess that they'd get all the conflicting effects at the same time. So what Dawn is saying is, well, let's say I have the second house and it has 5 planets aspecting it. Well, in rare cases, you would get actually 5 planets aspecting the second house all at about the same strength. But that's very rare. In most cases, one planet really aspects the second house and the others kind of aspect it. One planet aspects something and other things sort of aspect it. And to make sense out of that, just search YouTube for my content about aspects, because you need to know how aspects work and how they can be blurry or focused, or strong or weak. Paisley Peacock is a Capricorn ascendant with the moon in the second house and Saturn in the third with Rahu. That's interesting. Paisley, because I'm also a Capricorn ascendant. And I also like Paisley, and I also like peacocks. So I don't know if that's just coincidence. But my moon is in the 6th, which is a mirror image of yours. And I do also have Rahu in the 3rd. But definitely Paisley is very, very cool. All right, so what are we up to? We did second lord conjunction with Sun, second lord conjunction with Saturn, second lord conjunction with Jupiter, and now Buddha. Buddha, you get, so if it's Jiva, if it's Jupiter, then you get Dharma Shastra Nipuna. If it's Mercury, Buddha, then you get Artha Shastra Padu. Basically, so it's the same thing. So basically the difference between Jupiter and Venus and Mercury is that in both cases you get a lot of education. For the same reason, because both of these planets are pro-intellect, pro-education. And so is the second house. But the topic of education is what's differentiated. With Jupiter's influence on the second house, the topic goes more towards morality, ethics, law, philosophy, religion. With Mercury's influence in the second house, the influence goes more to Artha Shastra. Now, what is Artha Shastra? So the obvious meanings of Artha Shastra is maybe it means economics or finance. Maybe it does, but it also, Artha Shastra also means how you deal with people. That's what Artha Shastra is about. Niti. How you deal with people, how you deal with partnerships, cooperations, corporations, nations, politics. Politics is really just large-scale relationships. So this is what a person becomes expert in when Mercury influences the second house and the second lord. They become expert in how to negotiate and how to exchange and interact with other people. And that's what they like. They study probably communication. They probably study social dynamics. They probably study politics, maybe economics. Okay? Then, my favorite, Shringar. If Venus now. So again, it's kind of going to be the same thing if Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, they're all benefic and they're all pro-intelligence. They're all intelligent and they're all supportive of intelligence. So that's going to synergize or synchronize with the second house. But the topic of study and expertise is different. For Venus, it's Shringar. What does Shringar mean? And it's not just Shringar. Let's take it in two parts. It's Shringar and it's Shringarukti. So let's understand the two different things. Shringar is one way of saying romance. One way of saying romance is saying Shringar. In the In the artistic shastras, it's called Shringar Ras. It means romance and sexual love. So the person who has Venus conjoined the second lord is very knowledgeable in how sexuality works, romance works, how does love work. Shringar literally means beautiful. So the person with Venus affecting their second house, they are very learned in topics of beauty. So maybe they become great artists. Maybe because that's what art is, the creation of some kind of beauty. Maybe they become estheticians. Maybe they become plastic surgeons or health people. That focus on the beauty effects of health. Maybe they become fashion designers. Maybe they become fashion experts. Stuff like that. Shringar. And then Shringar combined with Ukti. Ukti means things that you say. So the person becomes very learned in how to say beautiful things. So that means they can become poets or good writers. So it's interesting he didn't mention Vak or Ukti with Mercury, with the second house. Maybe that was an oversight on his part. But he did mention it with Venus. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe it was intentional. So that should be making sense to you, right? This is all three planets are having basically the same effect, Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus, but just slightly different in their flavor. Good? Right, Swati. Right, Francesca. My second lord, Swati says, my second lord and fifth lord, okay, is Jupiter, which is conjunction with Mercury, which is 11th and 8th house. Now we're going to move, unfortunately, away from the benefics and back into the malefics. So let's hear what kind of nasty things he's going to say. So I mentioned this. If the conjunction is with Mars, then you study. Oh wait, I skipped the moon. With the moon, Himaruchi said you might also know a bit about that. So the way he said it is Shringarokti Patur Brigo Hibaruchi Kinchit Kalavid Bhavet. If this Lord is conjoined with Venus, then the person understands Shringar, which is beautification and love and romance. And if the second Lord is conjoined with the moon, then probably you also know something about that. So the idea is that the moon is not really a knowledge, a pro-knowledge planet, which might sound weird since the moon is the mind, but it's the intellect part of the mind that's pro-knowledge. The mind is about feelings and opinions. It's not really about knowledge. It's about likes and dislikes. So therefore, it doesn't really hit it off with the second house on the topic of knowledge as much as these other three planets do. So he says, but it's feminine and beautiful. So if your moon is conjoined with your second lord, you probably also have a similar effect to if Venus was conjoined with it. But I would add, you have also now an effect similar to what the sun would have. But instead of the paternal type of motivation behind it, it's a maternal one. Then he says Mars. For Mars, you're also going to be knowledgeable. But what are you going to be knowledgeable? You're also going to have arts, like kala. You're also going to have art. But what kind of art you're going to have? Krura kala. You're going to be art really knowledgeable on how to hurt people. So, what is that? Does that make any sense? Yeah, like people who are warriors, soldiers, police. Police are helping people by hurting people. Let's be real. Police are a threat to threats. So they help society by threatening people who would otherwise threaten others. That's what police are. So that's krura kala, how to be imposing, how to be threatening, how to punish. It's not that these things don't have good application. They have great application. They're very important and useful because the world is so screwed up. Like say Bruce Lee type martial artist, somebody that really understands how to fight, how to hit somebody, how to kick somebody, how to knock somebody down. Maybe not even physical, but just how to break somebody. That's krura kala. So that comes by the conjunction of Mars. And then I would break down the language like this, and then I would say if it's Rahu, then you have two effects. Pishna and Lohala. Pishna is how Rahu will affect your words. Both of them really will affect how it affects your words. This is what he picked to talk about. Like I'm reading his book because I think his book is fantastic. But it doesn't mean it's the only way to think about it. I mean, you can also say, shouldn't this have some kind of effect on the person's family? Because Rahu is also like antithetical to family and also antithetical to institution. You can go ahead. Once you are used to carrying plates, going back to the waiter and waitress analogy, once you're used to carrying plates, you can come up with all new sorts of ways to carry more plates. So, just be a little disciplined at first when you're learning. For the first couple of years, be disciplined when you're really learning. And just, don't go off the hook. Don't go off the chain. Don't go off on your own. Just really stick with working with exactly the material. But once you get that material down, it's a very good idea. It's a very good idea to not just take the letter of what's being told to you, but the meaning. So, yes, sure, Rahu conjunction with the second lord probably makes an unstable. The parts of life that are supposed to be stable and supportive are questionable and unstable when Rahu influences the second house and Lord. But what he's going to talk about is how does this influence the way a person talks. Probably the reason is that Rahu is very has a big effect on wind and breath. And Rahu makes a person. Rahu is very loud or windy and very strong. So when Rahu affects his second house, which is not really supposed to be explosive, it's supposed to be, second house is supposed to be solid. Rahu is explosive, so you get this kind of conflict. So he says Pishuna. Pishuna can also indicate what I was talking about, like your support system really wasn't there. So the result is you become Pishuna. You become angry. You feel like you're cheated. You were mistreated. You were let down. You weren't supported the right way. So then you become Pishuna, which means calumniating. And you to use those old English words, like where you want to burn something. So the tendency for people to really love to insult other people, or to really insult other people, to have that habit of insulting people, it's characteristic of Rahu's influence on speech, or Rahu's influence in the second house. Also, Saturn and Mars will do that as well. And then also with Rahu, you get something called Lohala, which means your speaking is indistinct. So it can also mean like you lie, or you say things that are just words that don't really have substance behind them, or you may have speech problems, like you might mumble, say incomprehensible things or mumble. If Ketu joins the second, Ketu Brashadalika Vag, then you're going to get a similar thing, but you're going to get stuttering. Ketu is more like stuttering and then lying. So that was a very interesting section. Do you have any questions about that? I will read through everything that we covered, and then I'll go look and see if there's any questions. So we covered first text 4, which is about how to see fame, happiness, health, and surroundings from the conditions of the First Lord. Visibility, fame, corresponds to how visible or bright the First Lord is. Happiness corresponds to how happy the First Lord is. If the First Lord is in a dustana, then there's not much happiness. But if it's someplace else, then there's happiness. Surroundings correspond to the surroundings of the First Lord. So surroundings will be as undesirable as the undesirable influences in the First Lord. So that influences from dignity, like especially if it's debilitation or if you're in an enemy sign, then your surroundings are, you're with enemies. Vitality corresponds to how much, like vitality in terms of your strength, your power, like how well rooted you are, corresponds to how well rooted your First Lord is. So if it's domicile, and if the First Lord is also nourished, then you have a lot of rootedness and strength. If not, you don't have rootedness, so you might feel wandery or unsettled, and you might be ill. Your energy might leave you. That was text 4. Then we looked at 5 and 6, which is about the second Lord. Next week will be about the third Lord. So smash the like button and subscribe and hit the bell and do all those things. Tell your grandma and your grandkids to subscribe and smash buttons. If the second Lord is in the first house, the second house has good planets, then they have family, beauty, all desirable qualities, wealth, a nice face, and good vision. So we talked about that. It's pretty simple. The better off the second house is doing, the better the themes of the second house go. The worse off the second house is, the worse the themes of the second house go. Then he talked about the conjunctions with various planets. If the second Lord is with the sun, then the person supports and protects others. If the second Lord is with Saturn, then the person has little or basic interest in education and prosperity. That means they might just be interested in learning whatever they need to learn, whatever they need to know. They don't pursue knowledge for anything except practical reasons. If it's with Jupiter, then they study law, especially law and scripture and that kind of thing. Mercury, they study finance, relationships, politics. Venus, they study poetry, art, and beauty. Moon, they study the arts like Venus. Mars, they study martial and cruel things. Rahu, they speak caustically and inarticulately, or maybe that means lying. Ketu, they lie or stutter. Very nice. Let's see if there's any questions here. We got a lot of questions. Roma gave me a donation. Thank you. Roma says something. Anyway, let's see what else. Why are we talking career with second Lord? Who's talking career? We're talking about what they study. Maybe people were talking about career in the chat. But also, your career is usually what you become good at. And what you become good at is usually what you study. So why would you think the second house wouldn't have an impact on the career? Elias Durga. Let me just see if people are going to have any questions. Swati, you're answering that. Dawn, you're doing a House Lord series and stopped it. I did, didn't I? I got bored of it. Now I'm trying to keep going and not stop when I get bored of other things. So I'll pick that up again. Alexander, second lord of Venus. Okay, but only conjunctions with the second lord are important? No, it's just that this is text 4 and 5, and this is where he's talking about the second lord. So next week he's going to talk about the third lord. Next 2 texts he's talk about third, then he'll talk about the fourth, etc. Divine charts. Can you remind us of Montreuil's definition of conjunction? Are orbs applied or just within the house with the Lord? Look here. Hey, Davy. Shuno. Look in chapter 15. Where do we put chapter 15? Shuno Mamo Badesh. In the 30th text of chapter 15, he answered that question of what does he mean by yoga or sambandha? How do planets form what we can just call conjunction? He says first thing is by mutual exchange of signs, or just by being in somebody else's sign, you get a slight bit of a conjunction with that planet. The second thing is by the way that you usually think of conjunction. Like, if the second lord is with the sun, maybe they're combust because they're close together. But the second lord could be in Leo. And then that would give the second lord contact with the sun. Especially if the sun is in the second house at the same time. So that's 2 things. The third thing is by aspect, especially if they're aspecting each other at the same time. So you might think second lord with the sun, maybe it's combust, but the second lord can be with the sun by being aspected by it. Especially if it's a mutual aspect back and forth. And then 4 and 5 is to be firmly angular or trine to each other. So that's to be in the other degrees that aren't always accentuated by aspects, but are always important, which means to be square or trine to something else. If you're exactly square or trine, very close to exactly square or trine, then you form bonds with that thing that you're very exactly square or trine to. So that is the reply to that. Swati, Dawn, Francesca, if you have time, could you please link to Sanskrit? I can't. I mean, you know what? Let me do it. But let me just, it's very easy. So this is what I'm going to do. Vic Dekara, Sanskrit. I'm just Googling YouTube and see what happens. Oh, the first result. Sanskrit crash course, pronunciation and beat, YouTube. And I got a bunch of other interesting results from Google too. So, just do stuff like that. Oh, the other resources, sorry for being condescending. It just comes naturally. The other resources like learnsanskrit.cc. Did you mean Parivartana Yoga by one or just one-sided? As I explained, I think. All right, guys. This was good. I think maybe this time of day is better for people. Let's see. I'll check it out. Maybe I'll consider moving my streams to this time of day on a more regular basis. Thank you, everybody. And if you're still here, one more thanks to Dallas for the compliment. Thank you, everybody.